you for joining us on Savvy Senior Sources, Talking with Experts. Let's take a moment and hear from our sponsors, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages SIDAC.
Provide for your long-term care. Convert your life insurance towards payments for long-term care. If you are concerned about future health care, you can convert your life insurance to pay for home care or assisted living. Health problems can be stressful enough without the added burden of financial obligations. If you feel that you no longer need your life insurance policy, you may want to apply the value towards long-term care.
Hi, I'm Beth Paterson, a certified reverse mortgage professional with Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. Mike and Carol decided that they needed a one-level home to fit their changing health needs. They used the reverse mortgage to purchase their new home instead of using conventional financing. This has benefited them greatly. Barbara decided to do a reverse mortgage to pay off her conventional loan that she was making monthly payments on. She had funds left in the line of credit after paying that off. And a year or so later, when she fell and broke her shoulder, she was able to tap those lines of credit to pay for her home care. As she said, she would have been up the creek without a paddle without the reverse mortgage. If you'd like information on how to receive security, independence, dignity, and control in your retirement years, contact us. Hi, welcome to today's show of Savvy Senior Sources Talking with Experts. Savvy Senior Sources guide your way through resources A to V through the TV shows, as well as the Savvy Senior Sources Guide and our website. Make sure to visit SavvySeniorSources.com for information on how to get a copy of the guide, as well as to find other resources. I'm Beth Paterson, the host of the show, and I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to our sponsors, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages SIDAC, who make the show possible. I'd like to welcome back my guest co-host, LaBey. Thanks for joining us again today.
Well, thanks for having me back. It's always fun.
Yeah, great, thanks. And today's topic is about dividing the little things in life. Often people think about making the will and covering the bigger things, but the little things are what can often cause arguments and disconnect in family. We're talking about who gets Grandma's yellow pie plate with Marlene Stum from the University of Minnesota. Welcome
Thank you
to the
very
show.
much.
Glad to have you with us and talking about this important topic. Let's start out and have you tell us a little bit about your role with the University of Minnesota and their program.
My role at the university is I'm a researcher and an educator. So my role in Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate has been to actually do the research and translate that research into really usable tools for regular people, as I think of family members and professionals who are working with families. And my background is in family economics and aging, and so I do a lot of research around topics that families are dealing with in later life, like inheritance or end-of-life decisions.
Okay, and we both serve on the Own Your Future Minnesota advisory panel, and trying to help people, encourage people to do the planning for into the future, and so it's been a pleasure working with you there also. So, who gets Grandma's yellow pie plate? I heard about the program years ago, and one story that sticks with me is the story of the Winnie the Pooh book that was left. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? And
it's a great example of, what we know is that every family has its pie plates. They may not be, as we kid, they may not be round and they may not be yellow, but everybody has some kinds of possessions that we've accumulated that are meaningful to us or that might be meaningful to others. And the Winnie the Pooh book example is one, actually a friend was telling me in her family, they were going through a house that parents had both recently passed on, and there's 3 siblings, and there's only one thing they all wanted. and it was the Winnie the Pooh book that Mom and Dad had read to each of them, and they all wanted that book. So I often use that as a great kind of metaphor for, how, for the complexity of this issue. So it's not as if you couldn't go out and buy a Winnie the Pooh book for a few dollars. I don't know. I bought one recently. I don't know what they are. They're not very much money. But the point is, there was such meaning and such family history, and you can't replace that, and you can't divide it equally. You can't divide it. So it gets to be complex really fast because of the emotion, because of the different value that people can put on objects. So the Winnie the Pooh book is a really fun example to use with people and say, well, who should get it and why? Or who shouldn't get it and why? And make up all kinds of family scenarios around that. And it's fascinating to hear what people say, because we all have rules about what fair means.
Yeah, and the one child, if I recall correctly, the one child of the parent didn't have kids, and another one had stepkids, and the other one had the natural born kids. So they each all wanted it, but they all were like, this is my reason for getting it, and that's where the disconnect comes in, and the decisions, how it can impact.
Right, and who should get it and why? What's the reasons for that? And how do they decide, as opposed to, again, I'm just guessing in that case, the parents would have never, ever guessed that that would be the one object everybody wanted.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that too, I'm sure. How do you know what's important? So
yeah, and then also Grandma's yellow pie plate, that came about because everybody remembered Grandma baking the pie, right?
We had one person that was associated with the project early on. By the way, the project's actually started back in almost 20 years ago in 1994.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we've had almost 20 years of experience of really learning about the dynamics around decisions and figuring out what works. So yes, it was a person who said, well, in my family, it's Grandma's yellow pie plate, and had a wonderful story to go with that. So the title stuck.
One of the things we had in our family was when my dad died, was he was a vet in the flag. Who's going to get the flag? And so in the funeral planning, I said, this is going to be an issue. And I asked, can we get more than one flag? And he said, yeah, you'll get, I think one free, but you'll have to buy the others. So we bought 3, because you have 2 brothers, so we bought 3 flags and had them boxed, so they were all equal and same sentimental value. But the funny thing was, at the funeral, they put all 3 out, and everyone's like, how many wars was he in? And then people said, what a great idea, because that was something that would have caused our family great grief over who got that, and it was just a really nice way for us to settle that. But the Winnie the Pooh book, you can't go back. Yeah, you don't go back. But there are some things that you can ask additional questions and maybe even that out from the get-go.
That was great foresight on your
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. So talk about who all is actually impacted by the decisions.
Well, first of all, this is an issue that affects the few families escape. And so when you talk about who should care about this issue or who has a story, it turns out to be almost everybody.
Yeah.
Regardless of gender, culture, no matter how much income and assets you have, we all have those possessions. And I would also argue that the lower income folks may have more value put on the possessions, because that's
their value. That's their inheritance.
So it is really an issue that influences almost all families, because most people at some point will downsize or move, and obviously all of us will die at some point. So it's pretty hard to avoid transferring or disposing of possessions.
So should families really think about, when they're doing their wills and kind of figuring where stuff goes, really think, you got to think about the big stuff, but think about traditions. What were traditions? I mean, you hear about the dishes, the Christmas dishes, or you hear about the jewelry pieces. I mean, those are just really common things. Or the roaster, because that just stirs up so many different memories. Or it might be the tools for the guys. That, you know, what is everybody's history? Is that, you know, and tradition? Is that something that family members should really think about and talk about with one another?
Ideally, yes. And the other wonderful thing to do is start sharing those stories now, as opposed to waiting.
Yep.
And that's what's really fun about this topic, is to hear families how they create some really fascinating ways of learning what's meaningful and sharing those stories, giving gifts that are meaningful now while they're alive versus waiting. You know, you give the baptism gown and pass it down, and the stories that go with that. Or it could be medals from a war that, instead of packing them away in a closet or in a drawer where nobody sees them and nobody hears about them, you know, how do you know? Otherwise, somebody may be cleaning out the house and they're just throwing all kinds of things away because they simply didn't know.
Yeah.
So it is important to tell the stories and to learn about the value of items. Now.
What makes it challenging for the families? Other than other than you can ask for more than one flag, but the possession, the other things, how?
Why is it so challenging? Well, I think it's first and foremost challenging not because of the legality. It's really easy to do legally. We'll come back to that. And for most people, it's not a challenge. It's not an economic thing. I would argue it's most challenging because of the family relationships involved, and because those objects have meaning. And so you're right; they're very much associated with Thanksgiving dinner, or who made that pie, or who baked the turkey in that roaster, or the fact that you always went fishing with Dad and this was his favorite pole and now you have it. So it really is thinking about all of those possessions and what makes the difference.
And don't you think for some families, I mean, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. I mean, if it's a pie plate and there's one, fine. But you know, over lunch we were talking about silverware and Christmas ornaments and things like that. And you know, so one of the things I'm going to do with we've got some leftover silverware is I'm going to make wind chimes, because that was something my mom loved, and then give that as gifts for everybody, so they all have a piece of that. And it'll be kind of silly, but I think it'll be something people will appreciate. So sometimes I don't think it has to be that all or nothing, you know, piece. But maybe you found different in your research. I don't know.
Well, I think we've found people are really creative, and they'll have very different opinions about what there means, about how to divide that silverware. And we see everything from, it's a 20-piece set and everybody gets one piece, to how crazy is that? Let's give it to one person who can actually use everything and have us over, and then we can enjoy that way too. Here you go, making the wind chimes, dividing it up in very creative ways. So there isn't one magical answer, and I think it really has to depend on who cares about it, what it means, those kinds of things. The challenges again come around when you think about how difficult families' relationships can be, and how, you know, we're talking about 50, 60, 100 years of accumulating possessions. So lots of complex, complicated relationships over those years. And the sibling rivalries and the mom loved you best don't go away in inheritance. They just start bubbling up again.
And a lot of times I hear the stories of families that got along, but then when mom dies, then that's when everything kind of boils over. Or situations where, oh, I don't care right now, but then when mom passes or the second parent passes, then that's when, oh, I want that.
Right. Absolutely. Families, again, that think they've done things pretty well, they were able to negotiate, are often shocked at when inheritance itself really is the source, appears to be the source. Again, things have obviously, I would say, have bubbled up for years, and now are coming out. But we do hear the stories. I don't think there's a lot of research on it actually, but more anecdotally about particularly losing that last parent, and then it's the siblings.
Yeah.
And And now it's kind of like, yeah,
The oldest.
everything starts kind of breaking out because the parents aren't there either to mediate or to see and hear.
Yeah, the glue is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the families really change. Do you think, because you hear a lot of people saying, okay, after someone dies, they just open up the house and everybody marks what they want. And I've heard that can work wonderful, and I've heard horror stories, on that. Do you have a suggestion of how do people start with this? Is that in the workbook of giving people ideas?
We do have a workbook that covers covers kind of 6 key topics that we found really make a difference if family members address them. And one of them is understanding distribution options and the consequences. Because there are, again, hundreds of ways that you could distribute things. And probably the first thing people ask is they'll say, can you just tell me how to get rid of the stuff? And it's like, well, there's more than stuff for most people. So first of all, it's dividing out what's meaningful and what's not. But your question is really, is there a simple way or easier ways? And there are ways that have powerful consequences, of some of which you wouldn't want. And some are legal and some are not. So when you think about it, I know it's very, very common that people will come to the house, perhaps right after a funeral or service, and they are there madly working and distributing things and making decisions. In most cases, well, in every case, your objects become part of your estate. And it really is at that point up to the executor. And so
I'm not sure that
Legally-
that's really thought about very often, that it's the executor who's also doing those possessions.
it isn't. And so it's really interesting to me how often families are informally going through things and doing things before they should be legally.
Well, and just emotionally, they're not all there
right.
after a death.
It's not the
Most-
best
right.
time, which is why, again, we would say, ideally, the owners have made some decisions in advance, have put their wishes together in advance, and have given that executor some guidance of what they would want and why. So immediately after the funeral, going through the house, again, it just isn't good for many, many reasons.
Yeah.
Many reasons. Anyway, we do have ideas for you.
Yeah.
Not perfect solutions, but some ideas.
So started and talking about some of those ideas. Sometimes I hear of people who mark things ahead of time. I know my aunt, who didn't have any children, she made a list out. This goes to this one niece or nephew, and so on and so forth, which obviously is one solution. We didn't have a choice, but talk about some of the other options.
Let me start with what people should do,
Okay.
and then we'll talk about what they do that they shouldn't probably do.
Okay, that sounds good. Like
So
a good path.
the best way to really lay out and have your wishes carried out is to really make them legally known. So start with having a will, and then in that will, you mention that you have created a separate listing of what items you want people to get. And you keep that list separate. So on that list, we have an example in the workbook, but it really is extremely easy. You basically take out a piece of paper and put, to my heirs, this is the list that's mentioned in my will, and you make a list of who's gonna get what. Obviously, you're not putting very minute, you're not going through every cupboard and writing a list of that type. But you're talking about the bigger items.
Nowadays, you're videotaping and talking.
You could, and then you could make, so it doesn't, yeah.
Yeah.
So you think of, the reason you're doing this separate is because then you don't have to update your will
Yep.
every time you change your mind or things change. So the idea is it's recorded, the big, when I say big items, I think it's important to know that, again, what we suggest people do is find out what's important to people in advance. So big might be big in terms of very meaningful, but not worth much financially. And other items on there might be worth a lot financially. And so you wanna make sure that you've covered kind of the gamut of
Fairness into an
of,
extent.
of thinking through the items that will be either contentious and or, again, that you know you either want to give people or not. So that's the best way to do it. Then ideally, again, family members know that list exists, executor has it, they can follow those wishes.
Mhm.
You can also gift in advance. I mean, I've mentioned that a couple times, but it really is wonderful to be able to give a gift, give that quilt to the granddaughter in advance with a story.
I love that idea.
Just, you know, it's good for the older generation. They don't have to buy something new to give somebody that's like, clean out your house in some respect. And it's just very, very meaningful.
Well, it can be the passing of the wand too of tradition. So if the dishes are going to somebody else's house, now maybe she's just not gonna have to be responsible for those holidays. It's going to the daughter or the granddaughter or whoever it might be. And I just think that it's nice because you can see it in play.
Yeah,
you know.
and the expressions in here,
Right.
the thank you rather than just.
Right.
I know
Yeah.
with my mom, she had given, she had basically said all the jewelry was going to me. And I talked to her before she passed and I said, you know, I think this needs to be separated. And so we sat down because I knew there would be a lot of resentment over that. And so then she gave pieces to everybody and that was just, that just made me feel so much better. And I know she was okay with it. I think she was worried I'd be upset if she didn't give it all to me, you know?
Yeah.
So that reminds me of one of the key reasons things are challenging.
Yep.
And that's the assumptions we make.
Mhm.
So often that mom might assume that you would want it all
Yep.
because, well, maybe you're the daughter, the only daughter, and you know, how could she dare give it on down the line? Where
Yep.
others might, you know, assume that, boy, if I even raise this issue, it might mean that mom thinks I want her to die.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one of the major tensions between generations in general are those motives of either why you're bringing this up, or what is it you want, or fear of what's gonna happen
Mm-hmm.
to my possessions. I've got, again, 85 years of possessions here, and my biggest concern is people aren't gonna want anything.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've tried to raise the issue and my kids say, oh, I'm not gonna talk about it today, or, you know, I have a pretty full house, I really don't think I want anything. And you're going, 85 years of possessions and nothing's of value to anyone. So it's really important to know what you're trying to accomplish, regardless of which generation you're in, and really be clear about that and have conversations about that, as opposed to making some assumptions that might be really, really wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And in our last couple minutes here, you wanted to talk a little bit about what not to do?
What not to do, particularly around possessions, is don't try to divide things equally. Don't try to put a dollar value on a possession that's emotionally valued, that will be valued, that has different emotional value to different kids. And then try to, again, say it's worth $5 or something. It doesn't work. It's just, you can't convert that emotion into dollars. And you can't divide things equally. So you have to come up with ways that are different strategies. And again, we talk about some of those. Some other things not to do, I would say, would be assume everyone will have the same meaning of fairness. And
So true.
not to do is to assume that, not to do is avoid thinking about both the process of what's fair. In other words, how are you gonna make the decisions is as important as what decisions you make.
Okay.
So fairness has a couple components to think about, and again, we help kind of people think that through. And very quickly, some of the options, like the verbal promises that people make. Someday I'd like you to have X. And it turns out all three kids have heard that same promise. Or the masking tape, it moves, it dries up. So there's many things that we know that are done that are not the wisest to do.
Okay, and we're out of time. It goes by fast. We want to point out you do have the workbook, and that there's a website. We have that on the bottom of the screen, so people can go to your website and access and find out how to get a copy of the workbook. And you do talks in different places and discussions, not one-on-one discussions
Right.
for consulting, but have different talks. So
We do offer some workshops if you're interested. We have a few people out and about, and actually this is something that's offered across the states. There's people nationwide that are teaching this. And the workbook though is kind of the key tool if you want to get things started in your own family. And we offer some free articles and some other tools on their website if you want to visit that. And the website will help you know how to order this. It really will help you through those steps, help you tailor what's right for your family.
great. Thank you for being here and discussing this important topic. Marlene Stum from the University of Minnesota. Again, thank you, Lori, for being my co-host.
What a great conversation. It was
Yeah.
very fun.
Fun and informative conversation. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. And don't forget to visit our website, SavvySeniorSources.com.
What is the secondary market for life insurance? The secondary market for life insurance is an emerging financial market that provides individuals options with their policies. These options allow policyholders to benefit from the value of their life insurance. Policies are sometimes a financial burden, especially for seniors, as premiums often increase over time. The secondary market offers financial alternatives that can help policyholders benefit from their life insurance now.
Hi, I'm Beth Paterson, a certified reverse mortgage professional with Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. Bob's wife passed away, meaning his Social Security income was cut in half. His financial advisor suggested he look into a reverse mortgage. With the reverse mortgage, he was able to take a dream vacation with his nephew, and oh, the stories that they can share. After Bob passed away, his niece shared the difference that it made to the whole family. Dorothy did the reverse mortgage in order to protect her other retirement funds. With her line of credit, she was able to travel, buy a new car, and do home repairs. Years later, she's still benefiting from the reverse mortgage line of credit and not having to rely on her children. For more information on how you too can have security, independence, dignity, and control, contact us.